10 p.m. Tuesday. The house is quiet. The fishing channel is on in the next room. He's not watching it. He's just letting it run. Outside, a car passes once. Then nothing. He's 53. He's been up since before sunrise. 16 hours awake. Hasn't said his own name out loud all day. Maybe this is a friend of yours. Maybe this is you. Right now in the United States, more than half of single men in their 50s live in a house that looks exactly like this one. Different paint on the walls, same single lamp, same single chair. And the version of this story you've usually heard, the lonely bachelor, the guy who couldn't make it work. That story is wrong. The actual psychology here is more interesting, quieter, and a lot more honest. Today, how a Gen X man ends up in a quiet house at 53. Why, most of the time, his days work better than people assume. And where, gradually, without anything visibly breaking, it starts to slip. I'm Ray, 56. Latchkey kid. One of those kids who came home to an empty house and let himself in. Raised myself. Read everything I could get my hands on. And at some point I figured out why I'm like this. I'm not a journalist. I'm not a coach. I'm not here to motivate you. I'm one of you. Over the next 30+ minutes, I want to walk you through the real psychology of men exactly like you. Not the version you scroll past on Instagram. The version the data actually shows. And the version your friends just won't say out loud. Because what your friends won't say, and what no documentary will say, is that this can be a real life. Not a half-life, a real one. And also, that it can break, quietly, while you are inside it, without you noticing. 3 things we'll go through: how you got here, why this works more than it fails, and where, quietly, without anyone noticing, it begins to slip. First, the numbers. I know, numbers are boring, especially when you've seen them a million times in the news. But these 3 are different. They're not about an epidemic of loneliness. They're about what this man's life has become, structurally. In the United States today, more than half of single men in their 50s live in a fully self-managed solitude. U.S. Census Bureau data, 2022, 55%. If you split all single-person households in America by age, the densest column stands between 50 and 60, not at 70, not at 80, at 50. And this is not an American eccentricity. Japan. 35% of men in their 50s have never married. The fastest aging society in the world, and the loneliest. United Kingdom. Nearly 1 in 3 men over 50 lives alone. Office for National Statistics, 2022. Germany. Solo households of men over 50 doubled between 2000 and 2020. Same shape, 3 countries, 3 economies. Same age, same pattern. Look at the numbers across 50 years. The scale becomes very strange. In 1970, only 7% of midlife men had never married. In 2020, almost 30, 1 in 3. This is not a smooth graph. This is a step. Between the 70s and 90s, 5%. Between the 90s and the 2000s, 10. Between the 2000s and now, there's another 15. The speed is accelerating. What changed in those decades was not the men. It was the structure around them. Median home prices rose faster than median male wages. Every decade since 75. Marriage stopped being the default container of an adult life. It became an option. The gig economy. Longer education. Later children. A working life that stretches into the 70s. Each of these pushes the center of a man's 50s further from family and closer to the self. This is not a subculture. This is not an anomaly. This is not, men just don't want to take on responsibility. This is the structural shape of midlife in the developed world today. And Generation X sits in the center of this shift. Not at the beginning. That was not the millennials. Not on the edges. That was not the boomers. Generation X is the first cohort to whom this has happened at scale. And here is the part the headlines miss. Most of these men own the house they live in. They pay their bills. They show up at work. By every external metric, they are functional adults. This is not the bottom of the data. This is the middle. But numbers on their own don't tell you how a man ends up in this apartment. They tell you how many, not how, not why, not what it costs to be the one who calls, not what it costs to be the one who never gets called, not what it means to sit in your own kitchen at 10 p.m. on a Wednesday and not remember anyone saying your name today. About that, psychology can speak, not the numbers. Psychology of 3 roads, and the mechanism that makes them what they are. To understand why a man from Generation X lives alone and yet does not look broken, we need to understand one thing the data alone cannot reach. Generation X was the first mass wave of children who came home from school and opened an empty door. 4 hours alone between 3 and 7, and no one to ask, "How was your day?" until 8 in the evening. They made their own food, solved their own problems, handled the silence. Their first real heartbreak, alone in the kitchen at 11, with no one in the house. Research from the early 2000s describes Generation X as one of the least supervised cohorts in modern American history, not because of orphanhood, but because of a unique structure. 2 working parents, the first divorce wave, and no built-in alternative infrastructure. And here the research turns unexpectedly warm. Studies of independence development in children show that what happened to Gen X was not damaging in the way it was framed. It created a specific skill, what Donald Winnicott would later call the capacity to be alone. Psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott, British, working in London in the 40s and 50s. He worked clinically with infants and mothers and ended up describing one of the deepest psychological skills in adult life. Winnicott did not start in theory. He started on the floor of a clinic. He watched thousands of infants with their mothers, and he noticed something almost no one else was naming. A child who could play alone, while a calm adult was nearby and not intervening, was developing a specific kind of internal strength. 1958. Winnicott writes a paper called The Capacity to Be Alone, and the very first sentence of the paper says, more or less, the ability to be alone without feeling lonely is one of the deepest signs of psychological maturity in adult life. Winnicott adds a clarification that is important to understand. This capacity is not the result of an absence of love. It is the result of love presence, internalized so deeply that the person can be alone without feeling abandoned. When a child sits and plays alone while a calm mother sits reading nearby, the child internalizes, "I can be alone, and I am safe." Latchkey childhood, in a sense, was the same architecture, just with an empty chair instead of the mother. Same skill formed, without the parent in the room, but with the imprint of one safely working somewhere else. Generation X was, whether they signed up for it or not, trained in that skill. Only without the second half, without the adult in the next room, just without. This is an important distinction, because the skill formed, but it formed with a particular distortion. The capacity is there. The paradoxical in the presence of another is not. This is a different type of solitude. When you are trained in childhood to sit alone, without an adult nearby, that skill stops being a skill. It becomes a setting. The default that activates by itself, without you choosing it. It lives under your skin, regardless of the situation you are in. The brain has a quiet network, running when the world isn't asking anything of you. Neuroscientist Marcus Reichel named it in 2001, the default mode network. In a man who has lived alone for years, this network does not atrophy, it tightens. Internal monologue grows richer. Planning happens further ahead. Memory consolidates differently. The mind builds the architecture it needs for the life it's actually living. And here, modern neuroscience starts saying things that Winnicott couldn't yet measure. We can scan brains now, and we can watch what changes in a brain that has lived alone for a long time. When a man has lived alone for years, his default mode network, the network that runs when nothing in particular is happening, doesn't weaken. It restructures. It tunes itself for self-managed life. Sustained focus, internal narrative, planning, observation of the self over time. A 2020 study from UCLA tracked older adults living alone for 10 or more years. Their working memory scores dropped less, not more, than matched peers who lived with others. Not because solitude is good for you, because the brain, given consistent input, adapts to whatever its actual life is. This doesn't make a man broken. It makes him tuned to solitude, to his own thinking, to a slow rhythm. And this is not new. Marcus Aurelius wrote his Meditations alone, by candlelight, in a military camp on the Roman frontier, 2,000 years ago. The book exists because no one was watching him write it. Montaigne built a tower at the edge of his estate just to sit in it, 16th century France. He called it the place where he could finally hear himself think. Solitude, as a discipline, has always been a way men matured. What changed in the modern era is that it stopped being a choice and became a default. And here is the price of this tuning. When life demands of you, suddenly, to retune, a new relationship, a serious health scare, the death of someone close, the man tuned to solitude does not pivot easily. He doesn't refuse. He just has not had to do it for years. Summary of the phase. Generation X was trained in solitude. Winnicott called this emotional maturity. Modern neuroscience confirms the architecture is stable, not impoverished. Road 1. Mark, 53. Never married. Retired programmer. Left the field at 48. It was not protest. It was not a wound. It just happened. In his 20s, he was building a career and a few dating habits. In his 30s, he was building habits and a couple of long relationships. There were other relationships. Some long, a year and a half, 2. But none ever quite tipped into marriage. When asked why, Mark answers, "We just never got to that point." And that was true. There was no anti-marriage decision. There was just an absence of one for it. When someone asks Mark, "Don't you get bored?" he looks slightly confused, not defensive. The question just doesn't land. Bored? With what? He has a project, 2,000 books, a podcast on game theory. The life he built runs on internal fuel. He wakes at 5:40, coffee, same beans for 6 years. He reads for 90 minutes before he opens email. He has not opened email before reading since 2015. His house holds the texture of one taste, one rhythm, one mind. Walk into it and the absence of compromise is the first thing you notice. But there is a trap. The deeper the optimization for one, the higher the psychological barrier to letting in someone whose rhythm differs from yours. The gap to the next partner is wider than Mark thinks and harder to translate. Road 2. Tom, 51. Was married 24 years. Divorced 3 years ago. Works in engineering. And here the data gets harder. Research from UC Riverside on divorced men in their 50s shows their all-cause mortality risk is notably higher than that of married peers. And the leading factor isn't disease. It's social isolation. The reason researchers keep landing on is not weakness, not a character flaw. It is structural. It is about how his social environment was built and what was left of it after the divorce. Many men, without knowing it, built their entire social life around the marriage. The wife kept the calendar. She kept the friends' birthdays. She kept the kids' friends' parents in the kitchen on Saturdays. The network ran through her, and when she left, most of it left with her. Tom, after his divorce, for the first time in 24 years, opens his phone and looks at his contact list, and he realizes there is nobody he can call without a reason. He scrolls slowly. 212 names. He starts to count how many of them he could text right now. No excuse, no reason, and they would not find it strange. He stops at 4. 4 names. 24 years of marriage. 4 men he could call without a script. He asks himself, when did this stop being a network and become a list of numbers I haven't dialed in years? I've been each of these 3, not one of them, each. I was Mark in my 20s and 30s. I was building a company. I let go of relationships I could have built for contracts. I was Tom at 41, a year after my divorce. I opened my phone and saw the same 47 contacts. The third, Frank, we're about to meet. But I was him too, after my father died, who held most of my roots. These aren't 3 different men. They are the same man at different points in a life. Most of us just get stuck in one of these 3 and think it's fate. Road 3. Frank, 58. Widower of 2.5 years. Retired history teacher. In his house. Everything is still by 2. 2 toothbrushes in 1 glass. 2 coffee mugs on the hook. 2 pillows on the bed. Frank has not moved any of it. On the bedside table, her reading glasses. He has not touched them. 2.5 years. He moves through the house, and the house moves with him as if she had just stepped out. He doesn't preserve it as a shrine. He preserves it because moving anything would be a decision, and he is not ready for the decision. Studies consistently show widowed men have some of the highest rates of depression and isolation in midlife. According to the National Institute on Aging, the risk of severe depression in the first 2 years after a wife's death is roughly 3.5 times higher for men than for married men of the same age. The main reason, same as Tom. The person who held the social ties is gone, and he never knew how much she was holding together. But there is a difference. Unlike Tom, Frank has no anger, nothing to convert into action, nothing to fuel motion, only quiet, heavy, honest. Frank is not broken. Frank is learning. Learning to live in a room that used to mean something for 30 years. 3 roads, 1 result. A man in his 50s, in a quiet house, alone. But how he got there and what works for him is structurally different. And we now understand which road you are on. And one thing applies to all 3. When the script of partnership ends or never gets written, the male nervous system does not file the difference clearly. The grief, the absence, the never was, all read as the same thing on the body. That's why a man at 53, single, divorced, widowed, can wake up to the same Wednesday morning and feel the same particular shape of quiet. What does this man's ordinary day look like? Not the one you imagine from the outside. The one that actually runs. He wakes up early, not because he has to, because his brain switches on at this hour. 40 years of internal scheduling. Coffee, the same every day. Same beans, same grind, same water temperature, 92 degrees Celsius. Not a ritual, not aesthetic. Structure that holds the day in place. Same shirt category, same chair angled the same way, same window he looks through. From the outside, this looks rigid. From the inside, it is the only thing standing between the day and nothing. And, important, it costs nothing. It does not require motivation. The structure runs the man, not the other way around. If he is working, he works. If he is not working, he finds something. A project. A deep dive on YouTube about the Second World War. Time eats itself, without being filled by anyone else. Dinner, whenever he wants. 5 in the afternoon, 9 in the evening. Fully on his own authority. And the size of this is overlooked from the outside. That quiet satisfaction in the routine is not a pose. It's not, I'm pretending to feel okay. It's a real state. Most days, it works. This is important to say out loud, because I'm tired of the ones who pretend these days are a disaster. They are not a disaster. They are, most of the time, fine. And saying this does not mean denying the other days. Simply, most days are good. That is a fact, and it needs to be acknowledged. Evenings split in 2 clearly. One type fills the silence. A game on the TV, scrolling, a drink. Not bad, not failure, just the evening that fills the quiet. The second type sits with the silence, like with an old friend. He reads, he thinks. He looks out the window for 20 minutes. This is where Winnicott lives in adult life. And those 20 minutes, the studies say, do more for the brain than a Sudoku or a podcast or another episode of something. Unstructured looking, unguarded thinking. The mind allowed to wander, without an algorithm steering it. Most days, it works. I said that. I do not retract it. But there is a risk, and it deserves the most honest part of this talk. It's called the drift, the slow slide, and this is the central concept of this video. It needs to be remembered. The drift is what happens when there is no external structure and no one reflecting your day back to you. The standards quietly relax. The shape of the day softens. Small skips become weeks. Skipped 1 workout. A week later, it becomes a habit. Food becomes simpler. Sleep slips by an hour. Nothing dramatic, and everything cumulative. And here is what the literature on habit decay actually says. Small skips do not add. They compound. American Journal of Preventive Medicine, 2022. Men aged 50 to 64 show the steepest rise in untreated sleep apnea, alcohol use disorder, and missed annual physicals of any demographic in the country. Not because anyone gave up, because no one was checking. A fully self-managed life can feel stable even when it is slowly narrowing. Harder to invite someone in. Harder to remember the last time you laughed in a room with two people in it. I'll tell you something I don't say often. After my divorce, there was a stretch. I was 41, 42, and I thought I was fine. I worked. I ate. I went to the store. At some point, my therapist, calmly, asked, "When was the last time you talked to anyone about anything that wasn't work?" I thought about it. I couldn't remember. Not for a week. Not for two. For 3. 3 weeks. I didn't notice. I could have gone another 3, and another 3 after that, and another. If my therapist hadn't asked the question, I would have made it to a year. I know this because after that question I started counting. And it had been a year and 2 months ago, the last time I had spoken to anyone about anything that wasn't work, and I didn't notice. What I call the wire breaking. No audible click, no signal, just a bulb that stopped lighting. And one day you realize nothing has come on for a while. Data on midlife men's friendships is especially telling. AARP Survey, 2023. 95% of men say friends are essential to a happy life. But in the same paper, how many friends could you call at 3 in the morning? The average day was 0.8. 2 for the entire emergency category of life. 2 people, total. You trust enough to call at 3 a.m. 20 years ago, for men in the same demographic, the average was 5. The number has dropped by 60% in one generation. But caring about something and being equipped to maintain it are two different things. Men in midlife often lack the architecture for it. No shared weekly routine. Compare to friendships built when men were 18, bunkers, basements, sports teams, garages. The architecture was the shared physical space. At 53, those structures are gone, and no one tells you that you need to rebuild them yourself. No scheduled call, no built-in cadence. Men's friendships don't run on conversation. They run on action side by side, shoulder to shoulder. Fishing, working on a car, watching a game, a basement where two work on the same project, not exchanging a word for an hour. The conversation happens around the activity. When you're 50 and your shoulder-to-shoulder friend is now 3 time zones away, the connection fades into a group chat no one reads, and nobody calls because there was no fight. The friendship didn't officially end. It just sits in the garage. A year, 3, 5. And each of you thinks the other will reach out any minute now. Around 60% of Gen X adults qualify as lonely. Higher than boomers, they sit at 45%. Cigna Loneliness Index 2021. And these are men who from the outside look completely fine. Job, routine, house, car. They don't look desperate. The drift is this. Nobody does anything catastrophic. Nobody calls. Nobody plans. And what the studies call the moment the wire breaks is not a crisis. It is a Saturday afternoon. A man sits down and realizes he has not spoken out loud to another human being since Tuesday, and that this is now normal. And the skill that used to be Winnicott's mature solitude quietly tips over into loneliness. What to do about this? And I'll tell you up front, not what you expect. No motivational steps, no 3-point plan. What works looks almost offensively small. I won't tell you to sign up for a kickball league. It's not your pace. We both know that. I won't tell you to get a dog, not as a connection plan. Instead, what research actually shows works. It won't be pathos. It will be inconvenient and very small. One of the studies describes a group of guys who came up with something called Wednesday Waffle. Zachary and 3 friends in Sydney. Every Wednesday, each one sends the others a short video or a voice memo or a photo. A few seconds for someone in your life to know you are still there. No scheduling, no coordinating, no pressure to be interesting. Just 2 minutes of being present in each other's lives once a week. And it worked because there was so little friction they actually kept doing it. What the data showed, once researchers studied it, is that the format itself solved the hard problem. The hard problem is not having something to say. The hard problem is finding a frictionless reason to say anything at all. 8 seconds, once a week. To say, I'm still here. That is not a connection plan. That is a connection. 2.5 years, without a break. Zachary posted it on TikTok in 2024 and got 1.8 million views in a month. And here, the real insight. Small regular contact beats big. Occasional contact, every time. A short text once a week does more than one long phone call every 6 months. It contradicts the intuition of, I don't have time for short, I'll call when I have an hour. The hour never comes. 2 minutes, always come. There is one more pattern researchers keep finding. It gets called anchored social. The same coffee shop. Tuesday morning. The barista knows your name. The other regular nods. 3 minutes of being recognized in a place that recognizes you. That counts. 12 minutes of low-stakes recognition once a week. The data shows it tracks with lower depression scores and longer healthy lifespan. Not friendship. Visibility. I'm not going to ask you to fix your whole life. That doesn't work. That doesn't work for anyone. What I want is one anchor. One person you stay in contact with. One routine that gets you out of the house. One thing that happens regardless of whether you have motivation. 1, not 3, not 5. Not a comprehensive restructuring. 1, and maintain it. Because 1 is actually achievable, and 1 is enough. One working anchor changes everything. 3 that don't work change nothing. Tying connection to an activity helps unbelievably, because that's how this type of man is wired. He's not built for spontaneous chat. He's built for repair, building, fixing. Friendship happens on the side of the work. Side effects are far easier to maintain than goals. Goals require motivation. Habits do not. So we embed connection into a habit, not into a project. And one important note about what does not work for this type of man. Group therapy, men's circles, weekend emotional intelligence retreats. The data on Gen X male participation, dismal. Not because the men are broken, because the format asks for the one resource they have least of. Performative vulnerability with strangers. If you go to the gym at 5 on Tuesdays, find someone who also goes. Doesn't matter if you talk. He's there, you're there, on Tuesdays. And the most important anchor is the structure itself. In a fully independent life, structure replaces the commitments others would otherwise impose on you. Wake up at 6. Read for an hour. No negotiation. Because motivation in a solo life is the most unstable variable that exists. Today you're in shape. Tomorrow you're in a slump. Structure holds you the same in both. When the structure slips, everything follows. Don't let it slip. Don't let it be negotiated. 6 a.m. is 6 a.m. One physical anchor. One person who expects a sign from you. One ritual that doesn't move. That is enough. Not optimal. Enough. What it adds up to. The real picture. Not for others. For yourself. These are different things. He is not broken. He is not waiting. He is not secretly suffering behind a well-kept routine. He built something. And it is his. But there are other days too. Sitting in a doctor's waiting room and nobody to text along the way. A holiday came and went without a single call. A Sunday so quiet you can hear the fridge. These days don't cancel the good ones. But they are real. They show up in the data. They show up in him. The work is not to fix him. The work is to not let the wire break unnoticed. The gap between being alone and feeling alone. That's where the real psychology of this man lives. He's been practicing not needing for so long, he often can't tell which side of that gap he's on. He can go 11 days without a meaningful conversation, notice it briefly, and file it under fine. Not because he's in denial, because the system he built doesn't have a meter for that. The wire goes dead quietly. The light doesn't come on. And the only way to know the bulb burned out is to try to switch it on. Pick up the phone, dial, listen. And if there's no tone, there was nothing else to tell you. Men's friendships often last 20 or 30 years. They hold on to the same guys from school, from the garage, from from the shop floor, from the unit. Not because of the conversations, because of the accumulated shoulder-to-shoulder time. And so, finally, picture next Wednesday. Not a transformed Wednesday. The same kitchen, the same kettle, the same window. But this Wednesday, one small thing is different. He plays it. It's nothing. A man's voice, same age as his, saying he saw a hawk in the parking lot at work that morning and thought of him for some reason. He smiles. It is the smallest smile. He records 11 seconds back, something about the radiator finally working after 6 years. That is the work, not a transformation, a signal sent, a signal received. One small wire held intact this week. Multiply that by 8 Wednesdays, by 20, by a year. And here, finally, what the data actually shows. Men who maintained one weekly micro-contact for 12 months. Depression scores down 28%. Sleep quality up. All-cause mortality risk reduced. Not because they fixed their lives, because they did not let the wire break for 52 weeks running. This is the part nobody tells you. The intervention is boring, the result is dramatic, and the gap between those two is the whole insight of this video. 5 years from now, the man in this house is still here. Same house probably, same chair, same window. But every Wednesday, for 5 years, he has sent and received one small signal. And the architecture under his life has held. That is what we did not understand about quiet men until now. They are not waiting for someone to save them. They are not silently breaking. They are running an architecture, a specific one. One that needs one small repair once a week to keep standing. And that small repair is the smallest thing you have read about this week. Pick one name, set one Wednesday, send one signal. Do that once, and then do it again next Wednesday. That is the whole video. That is the whole psychology. That is the whole intervention. Everything else is commentary. And if you're a man watching this right now in a quiet house on a Wednesday evening, I'm not going to tell you to join a kickball league, not your speed. We both know it. But call that friend you haven't talked to in 3 years, not because something's wrong, not because you need anything from him, just because 3 years is too long. And the guy on the other end of that call is probably sitting in a quiet house himself, in his own routine, waiting for a reason that never quite shows up. One call, not an hour conversation. A call, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 15. Something frictionless enough that you actually do it. Because the wire isn't dead, it's just sitting in the garage. Someone has to pick it up. And in this video, I'm suggesting, let it be you. One call, tonight, or tomorrow. Not someday, this week. If this video opens something in you, subscribe. The next story is about the same man and the boy he used to be.